At the heart of World War II, the main conflict for Nazi Germany was not just against its enemies, but within its own strategy, leadership, and decision-making. What began as a campaign of rapid conquest slowly transformed into a desperate fight for survival. As each major decision deepened Germany's, instead of solving it, the central conflict emerged from the vision of Adolf Hitler himself. Hitler believed in total domination, not limited victory. This meant Germany was never fighting a controlled war with clear objectives. It was fighting an expanding war driven by ideology, pride, and unrealistic ambition. This created a situation where military logic was constantly overridden by personal beliefs. Instead of adapting to changing conditions, Germany doubled down on risky strategies, even when they were clearly failing. One of the most defining internal conflicts was the decision to launch Operation Barbarossa. Germany's military leadership understood the risks of fighting the Soviet Union, while Britain was still unconquered. But Hitler saw it as a necessary step toward his vision of expansion. This created a clash between strategic caution and ideological obsession. As German forces pushed deep into Soviet territory, they encountered unexpected resistance. The conflict wasn't just on the battlefield. It was between expectation and reality. Germany expected a quick victory, but instead found itself trapped in a long, exhausting war of attrition. As the Eastern Front intensified, Germany faced a growing crisis of resources. Fuel, ammunition, and manpower became increasingly scarce. The conflict here was logistical. Germany's war machine depended on speed and efficiency, but a vast Soviet landscape destroyed both. Supply lines stretched beyond their limits, and harsh winters crippled operations. Yet, instead of adjusting strategy, Hitler insisted on continuing the offensive. This refusal to adapt turned a difficult situation into a catastrophic one. Another major dimension of the conflict was Germany's relationship with time. Early in the war, speed was its greatest advantage. But as the war dragged on, time became its greatest enemy. The longer the conflict lasted, the stronger the Allies became. This was especially evident after Germany declared war on the United States following attack on Pearl Harbor. By bringing the United States into the war, Germany created a massive imbalance. American industry began producing ships, tanks, and aircraft at an overwhelming scale. The conflict now shifted from tactical battles to industrial power, and Germany was losing badly. Internally, there was also a conflict between Germany's military commanders and Hitler's direct control. Experienced generals often recommended strategic retreats or defensive positions to preserve forces. However, Hitler viewed retreat as weakness. This led to rigid no-retreat orders, forcing troops to fight in hopeless situations. The most tragic example of this was the Battle of Stalingrad. German forces became surrounded, and despite clear opportunities to withdraw, Hitler ordered them to stay and fight. The result was devastating. An entire army was lost. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a psychological blow that shifted momentum toward the Allies. The conflict also extended to Germany's air and naval strategies. The failure to defeat Britain meant that Germany could never fully secure Western Europe. The Battle of Britain highlighted another internal struggle: inconsistency in strategy. Germany initially targeted military infrastructure, but later shifted to bombing civilian areas. This change gave Britain time to rebuild and strengthen its defenses. It showed a lack of clear long-term planning, where emotional reactions replaced calculated decisions. At sea, Germany's U-boat campaign initially threatened Allied supply lines. However, advancements in Allied technology, such as radar and improved convoy systems, reduced their effectiveness. Germany struggled to keep up with these changes. This created a technological conflict. Germany was no longer leading innovation at the pace required to win a global war. Perhaps one of the most damaging conflicts was Germany's treatment of occupied territories. Instead of stabilizing regions and gaining local support, Nazi policies were brutal and oppressive. This led to widespread resistance movements across Europe. From France to Eastern Europe, partisan fighters disrupted supply lines, sabotaged infrastructure, and weakened German control. This forced Germany to divert troops and resources away from the front lines to maintain order in occupied regions. The conflict here was self-inflicted. By ruling through fear, Germany created enemies everywhere. As the war progressed, Germany found itself surrounded on all sides. The Allies launched coordinated offensives from the west, south, and east. The D-Day invasion in 1944 opened a new front in Western Europe, further stretching German defenses. The conflict now became one of survival, not victory. Germany was no longer trying to win the war. It was trying to delay defeat. Inside Germany, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Cities were bombed relentlessly, industries were destroyed, and civilian morale collapsed. Yet Hitler continued to promise victory, refusing to accept reality. This created a final internal conflict between truth and illusion. While the situation worsened, leadership remained disconnected from the facts on the ground. In the end, the main conflict that lost Germany the war was not just external pressure from powerful enemies. It was a combination of flawed leadership, strategic overreach, and the inability to adapt. Germany fought a modern war with an outdated mindset, where pride often replaced practicality. Each decision intensified the pressure, turning manageable challenges into irreversible disasters. What makes this conflict so powerful is that many of these outcomes were avoidable. Different choices at key moments could have changed the course of history. But instead, Germany became trapped in its own decisions, unable to escape the consequences of its mistakes. The war that began with lightning victories ended in total collapse. Not because Germany lacked strength, but because it failed to use that strength wisely. The turning point of World War II for Nazi Germany did not come in a single moment. It unfolded through a series of devastating events that shattered the illusion of invincibility. For years, Germany had dominated Europe with speed and precision, but beneath that dominance, cracks were forming. And once those cracks began to break, everything changed. One of the earliest signs of a turning point came during the Battle of Britain. Germany had already conquered much of Europe, and Britain stood as the last major obstacle in the West. Hitler believed that by crushing Britain's air force, he could force a surrender or prepare for invasion. Initially, German forces targeted military airfields and radar stations, which nearly broke British defenses. However, in a critical shift, Germany began bombing cities instead of strategic targets. This gave Britain time to recover, rebuild its air force, and strengthen its defenses. The failure to defeat Britain meant the war would continue, and that Germany would remain vulnerable from the West. But the true and undeniable turning point came on the Eastern Front, during Operation Barbarossa. What Hitler expected to be a quick and decisive victory became a prolonged and brutal struggle. German forces advanced deep into Soviet territory, capturing vast land and millions of prisoners. For a moment, it seemed like Germany might succeed, but the Soviet Union did not collapse. Instead, it absorbed it and kept fighting. As winter approached, the situation changed dramatically. German troops were not equipped for extreme cold, and their supply lines were overstretched. Tanks froze, weapons jammed, and soldiers faced conditions they were never prepared for. Meanwhile, Soviet forces adapted and counterattacked. This was the moment when Germany's momentum began to slow, and then reverse. The war was no longer fast and decisive. It became slow, exhausting, and deadly. The battle that truly symbolized this turning point was the Battle of Stalingrad. This was not just another battle. It was a clash that changed the course of the entire war. Hitler ordered his forces to capture the city, not only for strategic reasons, but also for symbolic value. The fighting turned into brutal street-by-street combat. Buildings were reduced to rubble, and soldiers fought at extremely close range. As the battle dragged on, German forces became trapped. Soviet troops launched a massive counteroffensive, surrounding the German army. At this moment, a retreat was still possible, but Hitler refused. He ordered his troops to hold their ground, believing reinforcements would arrive. They never did. Cut off from supplies, freezing, starving, and under constant attack, the German army slowly collapsed. When they finally surrendered, it marked the first major and undeniable defeat of Germany's war machine. After Stalingrad, everything changed. Germany was no longer advancing. It was retreating. The psychological impact was enormous. For the first time, the world saw that Nazi Germany could be defeated. Allied forces gained confidence, while German morale began to. At the same time, another critical turning point was unfolding: the entry of the United States into the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor. Although this event occurred earlier, its full impact became clear as the war progressed. The United States brought immense industrial power into the conflict. Factories produced weapons, vehicles, and supplies on a scale that Germany could not match. This shifted the war from a battle of strategy to a battle of resources, and Germany was at a clear disadvantage. In North Africa and later in Italy, Allied forces began pushing back against German and Axis troops. These victories opened new fronts and forced Germany to divide its attention even further. The was no longer under Germany's control. Instead, Germany was reacting, trying to defend multiple fronts at once. Then came one of the most decisive moments in the West, the D-Day Normandy landings. Allied forces launched a massive invasion of Nazi-occupied France. This operation was carefully planned and executed with overwhelming. German defenses were strong, but they were not prepared for the scale and coordination of the attack. Once the Allies established a foothold, they began pushing inland, liberating France and advancing toward Germany. Now, Germany was trapped in a two-front war it could no longer sustain. From the east, Soviet forces were advancing relentlessly. From the west, Allied forces were closing in. The turning point had fully taken shape. Germany had lost the initiative, lost its advantage, and was now fighting a losing battle on all sides. Inside Germany, the situation grew increasingly desperate. Cities were bombed continuously, industries were, and civilians suffered greatly. Yet, Hitler refused to accept defeat. He continued to issue unrealistic orders, demanding resistance even when it was clear that the war was lost. This created a final tragic phase of the conflict, where countless lives were lost in a fight that could no longer be won. What makes this turning point so powerful is that it was not caused by a single mistake or a single battle. It was a result of accumulated decisions, strategic errors, failures, and missed opportunities. Each event built upon the last, slowly shifting the balance of power until Germany could no longer recover. The turning point of the war was a moment when Germany's strengths became weaknesses. Speed turned into overextension. Confidence turned into arrogance, turned into chaos. And once that shift happened, there was no going back. From that point forward, the outcome of the war was no longer a question of if Germany would lose, but when. When World War II finally came to an end in 1945, the collapse of Nazi Germany was total and undeniable. What had once been a powerful and feared war machine was reduced to ruins. Cities across Germany were devastated by relentless bombing campaigns. Buildings were shattered, infrastructure destroyed, and millions of civilians were left struggling to survive in the aftermath. That had not only been lost on the battlefield, it had left deep scars on the entire nation. The fall of Berlin marked the final chapter. As Allied forces closed in from both the east and west, there was no escape left for Germany. In April 1945, Adolf Hitler died in his bunker, symbolizing the Nazi regime. Shortly after, Germany officially surrendered, bringing an end to the war in Europe. For many, it was a moment of relief, but also one of shock as the full-scale destruction became clear. In the aftermath, Germany was divided into occupation zones controlled by the Allied powers. The country was split between the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. This division would later lead to the creation of two separate nations, East Germany and West Germany. The tension between these sides became one of the defining features of the Cold War, showing that even after the war ended, its consequences continued to shape global politics. One of the most significant aspects of the aftermath was the revelation of the Holocaust. As Allied forces liberated concentration camps, the world discovered the full extent of the atrocities committed under Nazi rule. Millions of innocent lives had been lost in one of history's darkest chapters. This shocked the global community and led to a renewed focus on human rights and international law. To address the crimes committed during the war, the Allies organized the Nuremberg trials. High-ranking Nazi officials were put on trial for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. These trials set an important precedent, establishing that leaders could be held accountable for their actions, even during wartime. It was a powerful message that such crimes would not go unpunished. Economically, Germany faced immense challenges. With industries destroyed and resources depleted, rebuilding the country seemed almost impossible. However, with international support, particularly from the United States through initiatives like the Marshall Plan, West Germany began a remarkable recovery. Over time, it transformed into one of the strongest economies in Europe. Meanwhile, East Germany developed under Soviet influence, creating a stark contrast between the two sides. Globally, the war reshaped the balance of power. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, and their rivalry would dominate international relations for decades. The United Nations was also established to promote peace and prevent future conflicts on such a devastating scale. In the end, the aftermath of Germany's defeat was not just about rebuilding a nation, it was about rebuilding a world. The lessons learned from the war, especially the consequences of unchecked power and extremist ideology, continue to influence global decisions even today. The of Nazi Germany serves as a lasting reminder of how quickly strength can turn into destruction when guided by the wrong path. The story of Nazi Germany's downfall is more than just history. It's a powerful reminder of how decisions shape destiny. From unstoppable victories to total collapse, every mistake, every choice, and every moment of arrogance pushed Germany closer to defeat. What makes this story truly shocking is that many of these turning points could have been avoided. But once the chain reaction began, there was no stopping it. And that's what makes this so important today. History isn't just about the past. It's about understanding how power, strategy, and leadership can change the future. The rise and fall of Nazi Germany shows how quickly things can spiral when control is lost and reality is ignored. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, make sure to stay tuned, because there are many more hidden stories from history that most people never hear about. Stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines, the secrets behind the decisions, and the moments that change the world forever. Backhand Index Point Right, don't forget to like, share, and follow for more powerful history content.